Bridge and brings an end to our look at the Polo Grounds shuttle. Now let's go over to the 3rd Avenue L in Manhattan and the Bronx. Between 1950 and 1956, the 3rd Avenue L used, in addition to the Manhattan elevated cars, trains of BMT Type Q, or Queens cars. These BMT cars had been rebuilt from open gate cars built in the 1900s and 1910s. They were rebuilt into enclosed cars with sliding doors and multiple unit door control in 1938 for service on the Corona line from Queensboro Plaza to the New York World's Fair of 1939 and 40. They remained on the Flushing line in service between Queensboro Plaza and Main Street, Flushing, until 1950, when they were brought over to the IRT, equipped with trucks from the motor cars of the former wooden-bodied IRT subway cars, which had seen service on the 2nd and 3rd Avenue Ls, and the Q cars then replaced the old IRT wooden-bodied subway cars in express service. We've come down from the Bronx from around 166th Street. We're leaving 149th Street, looking out the back window of a train, heading around the curve at 144th Street into the 143rd Street station. The Q cars were used primarily for express service in morning and evening rush hours, and like their predecessors, the IRT wooden-bodied subway cars, they were considered too heavy to carry passengers on the local tracks. Therefore, they had to deadhead on the local tracks to reach their starting points for express service. Since the Manhattan elevated lines had no yards in downtown Manhattan, the trains had to be deadheaded down the local tracks for the evening rush hour from the uptown yards and deadheaded back to the uptown yards in the morning rush hour. All this deadhead operation was very labor intensive, used a great deal of electric power, and was one of the reasons why the New York City transit system wanted to eliminate this operation. This is the 138th Street station, and now we're looking at a southbound train heading from the Bronx into Manhattan over the 2nd Avenue Bridge, which was a two-level bridge with 2 tracks on each level. A southbound local of Manhattan elevated cars comes around the curve over the New Haven yards from 133rd Street station to the bridge. And crosses over the bridge into Manhattan, where it will continue down the 3rd Avenue line. A northbound local, as seen from the main level of the bridge heading away from us over the 133rd Street New Haven Railroad Yard, south of 132nd Street actually, and a southbound train approaching from the 133rd Street station around the curve over the yards and over the bridge. Here's a train of Q cars, as rebuilt for IRT operation, still with the high clear stories and the roofs. Clear stories would not be lowered on these cars until they were returned to the BMT for service on the Myrtle Avenue elevated, but that's a story for another time. For now, these BMT Q cars were coupled into trains of 3 cars each, motor, trailer, motor, and for express service they were used in 2 trains connected to form a 6-car train. No more 7-car trains operated after the Qs were brought over to the 3rd Avenue L. This is looking south from Canal Street at a southbound 3rd Avenue Express, probably deadheading from the local track into the City Hall station, which was still operated at least up until 1953. Now, having picked up its passengers in the evening rush hour, a train of Q cars from City Hall comes through Chatham Square and up the middle track into the Canal Street station. Not all 3rd Avenue Expresses, even in the Q car era, were composed of Q cars. There were still some expresses of Manhattan elevated cars, although they tended to be local expresses, whereas the Q cars tended to cover all of the 3rd Avenue through express runs. This train of Q cars has come from the upper level of Chatham Square Station and has pulled north into the Canal Street Express track. Now we're heading north on the L with a southbound train of Q cars deadheading downtown, and we're riding the express track through 34th Street Station, still with its overhead footbridge, left over from the days when there was a shuttle from the 3rd Avenue L over to the Long Island Railroad ferries at the East River. That train of Q cars there was another southbound deadhead run, passing right through 34th Street without stopping. This is way up at the northern end of the Manhattan portion of the 3rd Avenue L at 129th Street. The large complex of platforms has already been torn down, leaving just 2 platforms, which were abandoned at the time and used only by workers. This train of Q cars has turned off 3rd Avenue on the upper express level, is headed across 129th Street, and is now turning onto the 2nd Avenue Bridge in order to head over to the Bronx. On the far right may be seen the stubs of the 2nd Avenue elevated on both levels, where the 2nd Avenue L structure had been cut away. Looking from the sidewalk on the main level of the bridge, we see a northbound 3rd Avenue Express of Q cars. It's just come off the bridge and is heading over the New Haven Railroad's Harlem River freight yards and around the curve into the 133rd Street station. Now let's do that same thing from a moving train. We've left 125th Street upper level and are headed northbound on the 3rd Avenue L Express. We're crossing along 129th Street and turning from 129th Street into the upper level of the 2nd Avenue Bridge over to the Bronx. We pass over the New Haven Railroad's Harlem River freight yards, and the low building at the right in the with the peaked roof is the former New York, Westchester, and Boston Railway Terminal, now shorn of its passageway. North of the 138th Street station, we see a ramp leading from the upper level to the lower level in between the main tracks. Notice that the rails are all corroded here. That ramp had not been used for many, many years, but would soon be used again when the middle track at 149th Street was bridged over to make a wide continuous platform in preparation for abandonment of service south of 149th Street. We're looking at a train leaving 143rd Street station. The stump of the abandoned Bergen Avenue connection was just seen on the right, and this train is turning from the private right-of-way onto 3rd Avenue. And as it makes the turn from 143rd to 144th Streets, it descends to main track level. Now, here is the 149th Street station with the center track still in use, safety striping still in place and appears to be fresh. Southbound expresses in the morning and northbound expresses in the evening would use the middle track, and local expresses would cut over to or from the local track north of 149th Street. Through expresses would continue up to Tremont Avenue on the middle track. Now we are leaving 138th Street upper level northbound and swinging over into that ramp which had been put back in service in 1954 or early 1955 to bring 3rd Avenue through expresses down to the local level, forcing them to share trackage with the local trains from 143rd Street to north of 149th Street. This train of Q cars is a northbound express which is on the local level approaching 149th Street, and there's a quick view here of the construction showing the bridging over of the former express track pit at 149th Street, as you can see there. North of 149th Street, the through expresses moved back into the middle track. Through express service was continued right to the last day of operation, Thursday, May 12, 1955. Here's a northbound through express of Q cars coming around the curve at 161st Street. passing right through the station. Its next stop will be Tremont Avenue. North of Tremont Avenue, it will move over to the local track and make all stops to Gun Hill Road. A northbound train of Q cars on a through express passes a southbound train of Manhattan cars on a downtown local at the 161st Street S curve. The building on the left is the old Bronx County Courthouse, at this time used as the Bronx Criminal Courts building. Tremont Avenue, and we see a southbound train of Manhattan L cars, either a local or local express, leaving, and we will see a northbound train of Q cars on a through express. Occasionally a train of Manhattan elevated cars would be used on a through express, but usually they were used only on the local expresses, which made all stops north of 149th Street. When the Q cars were brought over to the IRT, the classification lamps had to be moved from the outer parts of the roof to the clear story of the roof so that they would not interfere with the overhang of the IRT platform canopies. This is another northbound train of Q cars on a through express pulling into Tremont Avenue. And leaving Tremont Avenue northbound, it will continue up to just south of 180th Street and then move over into the local track. Hopefully that local train on the local track will wait for it to do so. Yes, you see that being done here. Now let's head back downtown. We're on the L between 138th Street and 143rd, and we're going to take another ride northbound on that ramp that leads from the upper level to the lower. The reverse operation was done in the morning rush hour, of course, with express trains using the local track at 149th and 143rd Streets and then moving upgrade to the express level on this ramp. We're on a northbound 3rd Avenue local or local express. We've just left 156th Street station and are heading around the curve that 3rd Avenue follows to get over to 161st Street. The trains on the middle track there are in layup, so this is either midday or a Saturday or a Sunday. After the closing of the 179th Street yard, the middle track had to be used for layup trains on weekends and in off hours. In effect, the middle track became the yard track, except during rush hours. Leaving 161st Street, there is Boston Road forking off from 3rd Avenue on the right. We began our journey on the 3rd Avenue L in this area in the 160s, and we will end it here with a last look at a train of Manhattan L cars, and having seen the Q cars on this line during the 5 years they ran here, we will bring the trip to an end. There's the 166th Street station. The Q cars were used on the 3rd Avenue L in the Bronx, north of 149th Street, for about a year after the 1955 abandonment of the portion of the line south of 149th Street. Then the Q cars were replaced with steel IRT subway cars, which made twice as much noise. How well I remember that. So we bring to an end this film of various different Manhattan elevated lines, and we hope you have enjoyed it.